Hi guys and welcome. Gnembon here with the 9th episode of Fun Farms, the series where we take one mob at a time and show interesting farms based around some cool game mechanics. And today, in my opinion, it's something really interesting. Our target will be mainly blazes, but I'll show some concept farms for all sorts of mobs. Typically, farms use water mechanics or redstone, mainly pistons, to move and drop mobs around, but in this case we will be using magic. Okay, not really, but it will definitely look like magic to somebody who doesn't know what's going on. So before we go into details, let's see how this quote-unquote magic works. Pretty sweet, isn't it? No redstone, no liquids, as clean as it can be, and it really seems like we just used magic to convince blazes to come to us and share their roads with us. You may have guessed that the machine that brings them here must be encased in this box over there. And you are right, so please pause the video and write down on a piece of paper what do you think is hidden there, and let me know in the comments later what was your guess. So the idea for these farms started from Maizuma Games' Blaze Farm design, where they used mobs' wandering ability to funnel them into a one line. So it got me thinking, is wandering truly random, or is there a way to actually control it and tell the mob where we want him to go? The matter of the fact is, if random things would be truly random in Minecraft, the game would be so laggy and slow you wouldn't imagine. All random behaviors are typically simplified and optimized to run smoothly in real time, allowing for some sort of abuse. So I dove down into the subject and found these interesting facts about mobs' wandering ability. Mobs do wander, meaning they walk aimlessly when they are within 32 blocks away from the player, have just spawned or left the 32 block away area but spend less than 5 seconds there. They can still start to wander. Wandering is last on their task priority list, so they do it only when they have nothing else to do. Typically mobs have 1 over 120 chance to wander in each tick, and they can start a new task every third tick, which means that it takes them on average 18 seconds between wandering attempts. If they decide to do it, they select a random block around them in a hypercube within 7 blocks up and down, and 10 in all other directions as a target, and then start pathfind to it. They stop either when they reach their target location or when they get stuck, so they don't even need to be able to reach their target in the first place. The key here is the fact that as a game optimization feature, not all blocks count as a valid target for pathfinding. However, they would take 10 random attempts to find such a valid location in each wandering cycle. What makes a valid target location for pathfinding? For all land creatures, it just happens to be any block that has a full block below it. So in this case, our creeper will never decide to wander because the glass I used to mark out the wandering area is not considered a solid block. So if I place a solid block within this area, he'll eventually find it and pathfind towards it. The target block doesn't have to be within the physical reach for him, he will just try to get closer to it. The game we are actually running at this moment is actually not entirely vanilla, but a little bit modified, because in vanilla we would have to wait ages for them to start wandering towards a single block. So I significantly increased the wandering chance so we can more easily observe certain things. Also, to tell how likely a mob would wander, I added a little function to a brown carpet. When placed, it will estimate the probability of a successful wandering attempt, as well as the time for the mob to move from this place, as you can see, a single block in real game will take 3 hours for a mob to go toward it. Some mobs not only wander, but have other random movements tasks in their AI, but most of them rely on pathfinding, and it all applies to mobs even in minecarts. So let's look at this. A common problem for iron farm designers is that villagers in minecarts since 1.9 can move on their own. But if it's possible to keep them away from full solid blocks, this should actually prevent them from moving. We can see here that as soon as I place a block nearby, he finds it and starts moving towards it. So let's check a few prototypes of farms based on mobs wandering. First is this redstoneless witch farm. We can build it by encasing with solid blocks the entire witch farm structure and digging a large trench exactly below the spawning spaces. This makes all the witches want to pathfind to the outside only. To make them go through these trapdoors rather than just walk up to the edge, I added these walkways that would trick them that they can continue their path on them and trick them to fall. I used here buttons to prevent spawning of other mobs in these corridors and replaced regular full blocks at witches' feet level with redstone blocks, which still count as full blocks, so witches can pathfind to them, but do not cancel spawn attempts at the wild level where witches spawn just outside of the farm, allowing pack spawning to add a few more witches to the pool. And what is the most incredible thing about this farm is the fact that this simple design is 100% efficient, producing maximum amount of drops a witch farm can produce. The only drawback, a big one, is the fact that to spawn witches player has to be at least 24 blocks away, but to keep them wandering has to be within 32 block radius, meaning that given 7 block distance between spawning floors we have very few spots we can actually FK to keep the farm running, meaning that we need to clear out the entire perimeter for spawning spaces for the farm to work efficiently. Not a practical but very cool 100% efficient concept nonetheless. Oh, and when running it, we are keeping at a time on average 20 something witches above us, waiting for them to wander off. Not bad in terms of not filling up the mob cap. Another example of a simple farm is this enderman farm. Because of the same limitations as with witch farm, and the fact that endermen require a 3 high space to spawn, we could only afford 2 layers. Leaves are just to encourage spawning attempts from outside of the farm area. The problem with this design is the fact that we need to drop the endermen very low, meaning our spot to get them and spot to kill them could not be in the same place, which makes this design impractical. Another, actually not that pointless farm with this technology is the zombie pigman gold farm. Player needs to circle around in a minecart because not all the spots on the spawning paths are within 32 blocks radius, and player needs to circulate to refresh the pigments so they get within the 32 block range at least every 5 seconds to refresh their wandering. In this configuration, the farm operates on about 50 mobs at a time, so about 70% capacity towards the mob cap, producing about 8,000 items per hour, which is comparable to other aggro-based donut type gold farms. It just doesn't produce as XP. Using light in this farm is quite unique for zombie pigmen because it just so happens that hostile mobs in bright light wander tiny bit more likely, and since light doesn't affect pigmen spawning chances, so we are taking advantage of this here. These pillars every 3 blocks also prevent medium and large magma cubes from spawning, as they would simply get stuck on this one wide drop chutes. And since we are entire time within 32 block radius from any spawning points, they wouldn't despawn on their own and block the drop chutes. So now let's go back to the blazes, which just happen to be a perfect candidate for a mob to farm by controlling their wandering, since like with all spawners they will keep spawning even if they are really close, which will also keep their wandering. Interesting fact, blazes are the only mob that doesn't have a customized size in the game code. That's probably why it's exactly the same height and width as a player. We also can notice that although it appears hovering above the ground, its hitbox stays flat on the ground, meaning we can hit them in the bottom corner here and still hit the blaze. This is going to be quite important in containing the blazes so we can safely damage them in survival. Blazes have this unfortunate social behavior. When one gets hurt by a player which it sees, it can start a chain reaction from other blazes which will start to shoot even through the walls. In this case nothing can be done and it is the safest to leave the area and let them despawn. They seem never to lose the aggro even if player switches to creative, which indicates that this might be a bug. To keep blazes and other tall mobs safely away from us, one can put them on a slab, potentially with a hopper below, a slab for a player and a stair, or a folded trapdoor to safely keep them away from us, allowing to come close and hit them as many times as we want without being detected. So to build an effective blaze farm using wandering, we have to clear an area 4 blocks away from the spawner and 6 blocks down, and then build walls and floors using only non-solid blocks. We also can place 1 block on top of the spawner to prevent them from spawning in the spot and getting stuck there. To build a case I prefer glass, but you can use stairs if you want something opaque, something that's not solid. Since blazes will be landing 6 blocks away from the spawner, it wouldn't count them to the spawner individual mob cap and allow more mobs to spawn. At this point you want to clear all the area from any solid blocks, 10 blocks out and 7 blocks up and down from any spot in this 9x9 floor. This will remove all the potential spaces for the blaze to wander. Now with the wandering disabled, we want to convince the blazes to go to a 1x1 hole with a trap which will be below this block. To do it, we need to create as many target blocks so that any path that goes from the blaze farm area to the target blocks goes through our trapped hole. So we want to go up to 10 blocks out in this direction, 10 blocks out in this direction, and 7 blocks up and 7 blocks down, and fill this area with solid blocks, giving them as many possible targets to wander as we can. This will also give you an answer for a question from the beginning: what was inside this box? There were blocks, normal blocks, and lots of them. And any solid blocks would do the job. Some interesting one to use: cobble would be the cheapest, slime blocks would allow you to see through them, magma blocks are solid but it would also prevent mobs from spawning on them, also redstone blocks are also solid but do not block spawn attempts to start, useful if you want to make use of an effective pack spawning like with the witch farm. Now for the trap, we will be using trapdoors. This is an interesting block, as mobs don't differentiate if they are open or closed, and pathfinding always allow them to walk on them as well as pass through them. So the drop should go here, so we need a 3 high gap here, for those blazes who want to potentially go upwards. We need a 2 blocks openings here and there to allow them to continue pathfinding. Now fill the drop shaft with trapdoors. 1, 2, 3 and 4. And 2 here like so to prevent them from getting stuck. Now we want to spawn proof these places, so we can place a button here and a magma block here, and our trap is done. Now all the mobs should find their way to the hole. Please note that the entire area around the farm marked here with the glass blocks needs to be cleaned from all the nether substance. It is not air here by accident. Once we have them in one place, we need to have a way to soften them up to one hit which would allow the player to do the final blow. The easiest and the most clean way to do it is to use poison potion. The strong version of it should do the job nicely in a 1x1 hole setup. You can also add this lever here with a torch and the back to open and close this hatch. That's totally optional, but this would keep the old blazes and the new blazes separate. So when we accumulate enough blazes, we can just poison them, and when they are all cooked, kill them all with one swipe. Obviously the looting tree sword is preferred. Although the use of a potion, despite being very economical, we can get technically many stacks of blaze rods here with one single potion. It's not free, so we can use the standard piston crushers. With 6 comparators and a button, stone if we power piston directly, or wooden if the button powers the pistons only through the comparators. It just happened to be exactly what one needs to soften them up to one hit. Another good solution is to use this continuous piston crusher designed by Snocrash. That will soften them up as they come, allowing us to just check from time to time to slay whatever we have collected thus far. It's a really cool system that we'll be using later to solve the 1.11 mob cramming issues. Another option is to have a completely hands-free system like this one, where we step on the pressure plate which creates exactly the length of the pulse we need. This is probably not the most compact way of doing it, but this one does the job as well. We just need to step on this pressure plate and wait for the blazes to get softened up. Now let's look at the actual farm designs, but first optimizations. This area here is where pathfinding towards it always leads the mobs to the trap. And if the mob spawns here, next to the hole, the probability of a successful wandering attempt is here 90%, because he has most of his target cube within wandering range. Great! However, if you are in the farthest spot here, the probability of a successful wander is only 10%, and it will take a mob about 3 minutes to move out. Actually standing here at the very back, the mob only sees the 6 columns as a potential wandering target. To increase the chances of wandering in the entire area, and we can bring the walls closer to the spawning area. First step, marked here with the yellow blocks, brings symmetry to the structure. Second step, the green layer moves the spawning area even closer and the blue one even closer. Then I ran an experiment where each minute I would count the blazes that would exist in the farm area, while killing automatically all the blazes that already fall into the trap. The results show that adding 2 more layers to the target helps to reduce the average number of residing blazes, and going to the blue area actually increases it again. It's because these extra layers, if chosen, will not bring the blazes to the trap, but very close to it. So it's easier for them to choose the trap next time they attempt to wander. So it's a balancing act, and I figured out going 2 blocks in helps. The basic layout gives on average 5.50 blazes at each point, and the optimized layout brings it down to 5.05, which gives essentially 10% cleaner farm. Now you might be thinking that that's a lot of blocks to place for a simple farm. The thing is, if you first build a cage for the blazes and a trapping mechanism, you can fill this area while the farm is spawning blazes for the first time. The farm will work just with a few columns. It will not be at first that clean. You'll have lots of blazes in the spawning area. So I suggest that you start with the columns marked with diamonds and then fill them up going outwards from that point. Another story is the multiple blaze spawner. A single spawner in this configuration will give on average 501 blazes per hour, and a dual setup will essentially double that. So it is worth to look for a double farm even if it's far away from your main nether hub. So I have been looking in my own world for dual blaze spawners and found that this configuration is actually quite common, where two spawning areas of two spawners touch in the corner. I found two such configurations within 2000 blocks away from 0, 0. Obviously, the cool thing about designing a farm is that the fact that your configuration might be different, which provides with an interesting challenge how to place blocks to let all the blazes wander towards the spot you want. In the worst case scenario, if you have no idea how to design it, you can fit n independent farms, which would be just fine, as long as you activate both of them at the same time. But with them being so close, it's just very tempting to find a solution to funnel them to one spot. The challenge here is that if we make a trap in here in the middle, we want blazes from this side to go on the other side, and vice versa. So I came up with this design. So what we have here is two sections of blocks that attract blazes on each side of the farm. For blazes that would spawn on the far end from the farm, it's a two-step process, since they would most probably decide to pathfind to one of the blocks on their own side. However, this could bring them closer to the middle. Those that are closer to the middle see entirely both possible sections, so have 50% chance to fall into the trap. This configuration is again subject to optimizations, and I found in the same experiment that the basic configuration gives 24.3 blazes at a time in the farm, and if you expand the areas to the walls and by one more block, this reduces it to 16.4 blazes at a time. Pretty decent and clean solution. One more thing with this kind of design when we have solid blocks on the floor, because this can spawn ghasts, and ghasts will actually prevent mobs from wandering. So to prevent it, we can just place a carpet here in the middle, and this should prevent all the ghast spawns within the entire spawner area. Now the actual farm designs. I'll walk you through a bunch of them. At this point we should have all the individual pieces of them ready, so you should be able to build all of them, but I'll provide you with the world download so you can have a deeper look at the designs that appeals to you the most. The first group is the designs for 1.10 and below, as well as 1.11 assuming entity cramming is turned off. And the second group over there is prepared for 1.11 vanilla with entity cramming set to default 24 mobs. This here must be probably the simplest blaze farm designs you have ever seen. The first one is a simple 1x1 drop shoot that collects blazes in one spot where you can use strong version of the poison potion to soften them up. Just remember to keep the distance. And then we can just slay them to get the loot. Very simple and very easy. I recommend no more than 500 blazes at a time, which will give us up to 15 stacks of blaze rods per potion. Try not to exceed 500 blazes, otherwise you may crash your game. 500 blazes is about an hour of AFK. Second design is very similar but uses a piston crusher instead of a potion. Very simple and still quite clean. The third one uses a continuous piston crusher, so the only thing we need to do is to slay them once in a while. We can even have a potion dropper to let us throw potions automatically every half an hour or so while we are AFK. In this position we should still be close enough for the spawner to stay active. So what about the dual setup then? In this setup we funnel blazes into a 2x2 opening in the middle, so we can collect them nicely in here. When player decides to harvest them, they touch this pressure plate, which compacts the blazes to one spot, and then player can activate the piston crusher and then manually finish them up with a looting sword. Obviously, if you struggle to camp with a dual blaze setup from your own world, you can always build two independent blaze farms and activate both at the same time. So let's hop into the survival world and see what can be done with this design. Notice that I removed all the netherrack and nether bricks around the farm to focus their wandering to the area designed for it. The farms can be turned on and off with the lava dispensers just above the spawners, held up with signs at the spawner level. Also, the entire structure that holds the player and protects it is made of non-solid blocks, stairs, single slabs, fences, and glass panes, not to interfere with pathfinding. Since this dual blaze setup is 1700 blocks away from 0, I built this translocator track here that also has a simple minecart loader and unloader station that allowed players to travel with an extra chest minecart. And kind of unfortunately, this would become obsolete with shulker boxes in 1.11. There's also a simple unloader on the other side as well. Enough survival for now. Let's look at the designs for 1.11 which honor default entity cramming, which prevents us from putting more than 25 mobs in one spot. The easiest way to do it is to allow blazes to collect in a larger area. We can do it rather easily using the continuous piston crusher that will make sure that we damage blazes in small groups only. The bigger the collection area, the more blazes we can collect at once, and because of the entity cramming, now we won't be able to crash the game by forgetting that we are AFK at the farm. This size of a holdout cell should accommodate about 500 blazes. Notice that we also don't need any mechanism to push the mobs towards us, as they will be naturally gravitating towards the iron trapdoors anyways, because of the blocks that attract the blazes to the trap at the first place. I should also point you to the slab of blocks which I placed just below the farm. Those are out of reach for the blazes in the spawning area, but visible for the blazes in the killing area. The issue here with this type of farms is that even when we came up with some methods of preventing them from cramming, they will try to cram themselves anyways because all they want is to path to one corner. Providing them with additional blocks to path to the other side reduces cramming that one corner, allowing to kill more blazes at once. The issue with this is we have to AFK in this area where the purple slabs are, and if we move away from the spot, this would put us too far from the spawner to remain active, so we don't have the flexibility of freely going back and forth killing blazes while new ones spawn above us. It's not a big deal as killing takes literally a moment, but it would be better if we could avoid it. Similar situation is here with this dual blaze setup. I added these trapdoors in this configuration here because they are traversable for pathfinding, so blazes can still attempt to go from one area to the other, and the trapdoors will make them fall into these two 1x1 holes. This allows us to have two piston crushers on the diagonal powered from the same clock at the same time. These two holes eventually open into this collection area at the bottom, which again is positioned so blocks from the farm attract the softened blazes to come closer to trapdoors so we can easily reach them. The problem here is the fact that to activate the spawners we have to stay at the spot, and if we drop even half a block it will put the spawners just out of the range. But I have a solution for this issue as well. So the attempt of fixing the distance issue, I came up with this possibly the slowest in the game piston translocator. And I know, piston's translocation has been fixed in 16W40A, but I would still like to briefly show it to you guys because I think it worked in a really cool way. It starts with a comparator pulse extender. We can add a torch to it, and this way we can get a comparator fade out clock, which has this interesting feature that it generates a very interesting analog output. We can then simply connect this output to the row of pistons which we can use to transport the mobs out. Fade out comparator clock is built into the continuous blaze crusher, and we can use its signal to move the blazes out of the way using pistons. In the non-entity cramming version, we didn't need to move around to collect the blazes, and despite the need to drop them down a few blocks, we were still in the range for the spawner. In 1.11 version, we would need to have a larger collection area, so as a workaround, after blazes get crashed, they can be translocated from the collection area into a more suitable location just below the spawner, using our slowest in the world mob translocator. The issue with using continuous piston crusher and dropping them into a cell below is the fact that we are losing a lot of height just to collect the blazes, which make us either away of the range of the spawner or just at the border of it. One way of saving on the drop is to place the collection chamber not below but next to the crusher and use the bottom slab action to push the softened blazes up into the collection chamber. Here are two designs that use this crashing and moving mechanism, and this would seem to be a preferred method of storing blazes for the upcoming 1.11, as it doesn't rely on any unintended feature in the game. It doesn't require to move blazes around, which is a pain. In this single blaze spawner setup, all the spots where the player roams allow for the spawner to stay active. And in this dual blaze setup, we have a bunch of spots that activate both spawners, even staying at the blaze level. However, if we are not fond of using piston crushers, you can still use potions to soften blazes and you wouldn't need to worry about not activating the spawner. In this case, we install a latch above the entity cramming save mobs holdout cell I shared with you in my previous video. In the holdout cell, we have two pairs of dispensers with a splash poison potions. These long lasting, not the strong ones, operated independently. What we would want to do is to AFK for an hour, which would allow us to collect a few hundred blazes just above our heads in the spawner area, and then when we would let about 150 blazes into the chamber, splash them once, splash them twice, and they should be all at 1 point of health. We can then step down to finish this batch. So that were the simplest and in my opinion the coolest blaze farms you can build, using mostly air, blocks, that run on magic, or not really, it's just wandering. But if you have somebody that doesn't know what's going on, you can always tell them that. So if you liked the video, don't forget to like, share with others and leave your comment in the comment area below to let me know what's your opinion about it. And see you in the next one, bye bye!